So thank you, all of you, for being here this evening. And I want to start with something that I think everybody is interested in, which is the audition process to get into a top orchestra. And Demarre, I'm going to start with you because you auditioned for and won the same job twice. So what hoops did you have to jump through to do that audition?
what what
Or
hoops?
those auditions?
Yes. Well, you mean other than practicing and showing up and crossing my fingers?
Hard
Uh
to play the flute with crossed fingers.
yeah, anything's possible. I would like to clarify something. My father actually did dabble. He did touch the flute that was gifted to him by my mother. But by the time I was 7, at that point it was collecting dust. So I want to clarify that. Well, for me, I think one of the biggest hoops that is helps when if you're trying to experience some sort of success auditioning is to really is to know yourself, to know your playing. So I spend a lot of time uh, getting to know my playing, recording myself, playing for people, um, knowing how I act really personally and musically in high stress situations, so that even at my worst, I would say, winning an audition is almost an impossible thing, but maybe 2 out of 5, I'm feeling good about those odds, so that I know that even when I am, I'm exhausted, I'm nervous, I'm having a bad day, it may be good enough to win. Other than that, there's just the fact that, yeah, there's usually multiple rounds. Um, most of it, if not all of it, is behind a screen, um, and
So
yeah,
the
hopefully
people
you're
who
playing
are
well.
so the people who are listening don't see who is
Right.
walking.
I mean, it's this varies organization to organization. In the case of the Seattle Symphony, um, the screen comes down in the final round. These days, there's a lot of my colleagues choose to just create their own screen. They just put up 4 stands. There's that option. But yeah, I have to say that I've taken a bunch of auditions. I've played in a handful of orchestras. I don't know, 4 or 5 orchestras, and nothing felt better than um, winning this job a second time. I put myself in a situation where I guess I wanted to see if I could swim back to shore, having been a tenured principal musician of some orchestra for, I don't know, 15 years or so, 17 years at that point. It was nice to know that after all of those years that I could still win a job.
But how did that feel? I mean, going back and playing for your colleagues in that way, was that more pressure, or was it somewhat comfortable because you know the hall so well because you played so many concerts in it? What was that
Yeah,
like for you? I'm really
that's a really,
curious.
really good question. It felt like every other audition I've taken. It wasn't, I can't say it was more comfortable or less. It felt like an audition that I knew that I needed to earn. I mean, I had, prior to that, I spent the previous season with the Met Opera. And prior to that, 3 years as principal with the Dallas Symphony. So I didn't really remember the hall. I played it, I mean, I knew that I liked it, and that's about it. But um, it didn't feel any more comfortable. I took it as seriously as
Well, of course. I mean, I think
you
in some
know.
ways, I would feel like it's more difficult in a way to
And
go and
Stephanie,
Stephanie, you just lived it. So what did that
Yeah.
feel like for you? My goodness.
yeah, actually, I wanted to ask, you auditioned twice in Cincinnati, but for very different jobs. So can you talk about auditioning for those two very different jobs?
Yeah, actually it was 3 different auditions. So the first job I had was or audition was for second violin section. And that was a typical, I mean, in Cincinnati, everything is behind a screen. So in that respects, all of the auditions were similar. And then my second audition was, I won the associate concertmaster job. So that was for 2 seasons ago. So I was in that chair prior to the concertmaster chair. And then the concertmaster audition was before this past season. So this is my second season. And I think in some ways, yeah, David, you're right. It's a little bit more nerve-wracking to play for people that you know behind the screen you'll have to face in work every day. So if something goes wrong, you're like, oh my gosh, this could be embarrassing for 25 years. But in some ways, it is comforting to know the hall, and to have for me, in my case, to have taken 2 auditions prior to that, to know what an audition in that hall feels like as well, was slightly comforting, if you can even call any part of an audition comforting.
Do they recognize your sound? Demarre and Stefani, do you think people recognize, because everybody has a distinctive sound?
I don't know. I've sat on a couple of panels, and you always kind of know that there are people that you might know taking the audition, but I actually have never been able to tell somebody's sound because it's behind a screen after so many people play in a row. I mean, trying to guess who people are is just kind of a futile thing. I think it becomes impossible when it's back-to-back musicians playing the same excerpts, in my case. Yeah.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, nearly impossible from my experience.
Yeah, and it's actually folly to try. I mean, I know some colleagues who try to listen. Do I know that person or whatever? And they never get it right, and so I never try.
Well, after hearing 49 candidates, straight in a row, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And you'd be surprised what people vote for. Sometimes you can get 13 votes and one person votes against it, or there's a variety of opinions and choices out there.
So Dave, you've been in Philly since 1995. Is that
got
correct?
my 25-year watch this year? Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks.
And before that, you were principal in Dallas. Has the audition process changed over the years?
Not in my experience, because both of the auditions I took were for those orchestras, as well as other orchestras before I was in those positions. They were all screened. Philly, we take the screen down for the finals. And that was also, I believe, the case in Dallas. There I had trial services. They weren't doing trial weeks, but they had folks come in to play rehearsals with the orchestra. And it happened that for that job, the other finalist was one of my best friends. And they had us playing on the same day, like back to back in the same rehearsals. And it was really, it's tougher when the screen is down and when you've got that, that sort of head to head with somebody. It was somebody I'd played chamber music with as well. We were in a brass quintet together. I mean, it was like, it couldn't get more close than that. And I had such respect for that person, who happens to be Mike Sachs, who's principal of the Cleveland Orchestra. So we both ended up with good jobs coming out of that. But it was, the process hasn't really evolved so much in these orchestras. I know, it's likely to take some turns now when we're looking at how we're going to screen resumes and the push. I think the correct push to leave screens up the way the Met does all through the process. I know there are advantages in some ways to be able to see someone's technique, or see if there's some body movement or something they do that drives you crazy because you don't want to sit next to somebody who's, just distracting in that way. But I think it's in many ways it's going to be better for us to just leave the screens up and listen and not see resumes and do those kinds of things. But those changes, at least in Philly, haven't happened yet, although we're having major institutional discussions about how to adjust the process.
Pedro, you've been in orchestras literally all over the world, like in Africa too. How were the auditions for those various positions different?
Well, that's interesting, because for South Africa in Natal Philharmonic in Durban, I auditioned with a cassette. Some people here might not know what a cassette is. But just for the cassette, you require also a pencil to use it. And so it was really interesting. That was the beginning of my English horn career. They asked me, there were two openings. There was one for assistant principal and another one for English horn. And so I recorded the oboe. I was just out of Juilliard, so my oboe playing was decent. But I've never really played that much English horn. And I had a student English horn that I was just, just dabbling with. And so I recorded the English horn on the tape too, just for fun. And so I got a letter. This was the time where you send a cassette and you wait for the letter. And they said, well, yeah, your oboe playing is great, but your English horn player is not so good. Can you make another tape? And I'm like, okay, I'll make another tape. So I made another tape, and they're like, well, okay, your oboe playing is good, the English horn. We're going to offer you the English horn job. So, well, what happened is at the time there was someone who was a local person who auditioned in person. So I think he deserved to have the oboe job. But so I learned that way. This was my trial by fire.
Okay, so you auditioned for a specific spot in the orchestra, including principal. Once you're there, can you sort of breathe a sigh of relief and rest on your laurels? Or can another section member, I had a high school friend, we were the two oboists in our high school orchestra.
Yeah. I forgot, you're an oboist, I forgot.
I'm a recovering oboist. No, I was never very good. But
at least you recovered, that's good.
But she asked, so can somebody else in the orchestra challenge you for your job? Because apparently she remembers in high school that if you thought the person next to you wasn't as good as you were, you could go, well, I could play first better than she can play first. I want that. Can somebody in the orchestra challenge you for the job once you have it, or is that just not done?
Well, people say that all the time. I can play that better. But
well, I think that high school, youth orchestra and high school need a union.
I see. So the union puts the kibosh on that.